Hey everybody, I want to take a moment to show you what I think you should be playing in Standard right now. I did a video of a recent Monday Night Magic, and this was the deck I brought, and it's been pretty successful for me overall. Been playing it online a lot, been playing it in store a lot, and yeah, it just wins. So let's go over what's in it, what I think you need to know, and why it fits in the meta. So quickly, let's just go over creatures. We're only running a total of 9. It's a Torrential Gearhulk deck, so we're running a full playset of those. The deck is an Esper, so since we have the access to white, we are running 4 Spell Queller, and we're going to run it as long as we can, as long as Eldritch Moon's in the format, which we don't have too much longer. And one thing that's really good about Spell Queller, especially in the current meta, is there's a lot of other mid-range and control decks that are playing counter magic. This can kind of win a counter war, because a lot of times they'll do like disallow, and you'll Spell Queller, and they can't use the negate or the censor. Well, censor they can, but the negate or a lot of the other counter spells that they're holding up, this just completely avoids that problem. Another thing is Linvala, which is really, really good against late game threats. We only have one of. This deck tends to stabilize. Like, you're going to lose. I've noticed I get down to about 12 to 10 life, and right around then is when I start to stabilize. So this is really good late game to drop, and you can gain 5 life. And against some of the aggro builds, like the zombies decks out there right now, you can get an extra creature, which is also really good value. Let's go ahead and talk about how it actually runs. We're running a ton of instants because it is a Gearhulk deck, so we'll just quickly go through them and why each one's important. So first, let's talk about card draw. We have 4 Anticipate and 3 Glimmer of Genius. Now, a lot of people have mentioned Pull from Tomorrow and things like that. It's a fantastic card, and it does belong in a lot of control decks, just not in this particular build, because we don't have the ability to get a lot of value out of it off of our Gearhulks like we can with Glimmer of Genius, and that's why that spot is taken by this card. So I just want to get that out there, because I'm sure people will comment below about it. Now, moving on to counter magic, we're running 3 Disallow, which is going to solve any problem you can possibly think of, 2 Negate, and 3 Censors. Now, Censors is kind of a combination between card draw and spells. It's one of those cards you can use in the first 3 turns of the game. After that, you're pretty much going to cycle through, and it's just a good way to filter through your deck. Once going back to Spell Queller, this counts, in my mind, as more counter magic, so it makes it so we can have quite a lot. But the reason Spell Queller is important is trying to get it down early game, and you develop a clock. Even though it's just 2 damage continuously, that can be really important late game, because when you resolve a Torrential Gearhulk, you want to basically close the game out in like 2 turns, 3 tops. So having this on board early, and you can just do 2, 4, 6, 8, and then eventually you drop down Torrential Gearhulk, 2-turn clock, you close out the game, you're done. Okay, so that's also why this is important. Okay, so let's talk about removal. 4 Fatal Push, extremely important. With all the aggro builds out there, a lot of tokens builds getting played. It's just an all-star card. Also, I did have Grasp of Darkness and Murder and other things in the deck at one point, and one of the biggest reasons why we're an Esper is the ability to exile stuff, which is pretty important, especially against Marvel decks right now. Dropping Ulamog, we can actually solve the problem of a resolved Ulamog, or we can get rid of things like a Gideon that's attacking, or we can get rid of any of the zombie like recursive cards like Dread Wanderer or Scrapheap Scrounger. So main board, and we have more on the side, I'm running 2 Anguish Unmaking, which one is for creatures, and then also can get rid of problematic things like Aetherworks Marvel or a Planeswalker or something of that sort. And then also we're running Declaration in Stone. In the previous standard, this spot was taken by Grasp of Darkness for, cat combo and all those kind of things. But Deck in Stone is so much more important in the current meta, so we're running 2. And we have actually 1 of each of those in the sideboard. So we have 1 more Anguish and 1 more Deck in Stone. So for certain matchups, we bring those in. Okay, and that's pretty much going to complete for removal. Oh, Cast Out. Another great card out of Amonkhet. This was Stasis Snare, and I ended up trying this instead. And it is, in fact, a better card all around. Sometimes hitting 2 white for Stasis Snare, even though it's lower on the curve, is a bit difficult. So 4 tends to happen more often with the single 1 white mana than the 2 white mana at 1. And the fact you can cycle it late game or when it's irrelevant is also really good. Okay, so I'll quickly go over the mana base. Now we are using Aether Hub, and Aether Hub is very important early game because the mana base, it's a 3-color deck, and there isn't really any blue fast lands. I mean, there's the blue-red Spirebluff Canal, but that's irrelevant to us. To our colors, the only ones you really have is Concealed Courtyard, so this can solve some problems early game, especially if we want to like turn 2 Anticipate or turn 2 Censor. This can really solve that issue. Also, if we're trying to play Gideon, which we'll go into in a moment, that has double white, sometimes we're not hitting that double white, and this Aether Hub can solve that problem. So it's extremely important to run the 3. So let me just go through quantities of what we have, and then I'll show you why it's set up this way. So we have 3 Concealed Courtyard, 4 Prairie Stream, 2 Shambling Vents, and 2 Sunken Hollows, and the rest are just going to be basic lands. So it's going to be 5 islands, 3 swamps, and 2 plains. Now the combinations you have here is you have 14 sources that can tap for black, 14 sources that can tap for blue, and 14 sources that can tap for white. So it's completely even. And then also with the amounts of what comes in tapped and untapped, we have the most efficient way that I could possibly make it with the current mana bases that are out there. It didn't start out with the 4 Prairie Stream, but I eventually found out that this was entirely necessary to really lean on this card. And then lastly for the main board, 2 Gideon. Extremely big problem for other control decks, which there's quite a bit of in the format, especially blue-red. I've seen some Simic control decks, which have been pretty powerful. It's just an all-star. Everyone knows this card's good, so we're going to run the 2 of them. Experimented with the newer one. The newer one's not as good in this kind of shell because it's the +1 where you make the token is really, really important. It's almost more important than him attacking because it buys you an entire turn oftentimes, and it can trade. That's pretty much what we're looking to do, is trade with something that someone else has, whether it be Thraben Inspector or some other little creature that they played early on in the game that we didn't have removal at that point. So that's basically what we're going to do with it. Speaking of trading, I want to mention something that I've had to do often is with Spell Queller. This can also trigger Revolt. We don't have any other ways of triggering Revolt with Fatal Push. So sometimes a good play to do is say that you're playing against someone who has 2 creatures attacking, you flash in Spell Queller, Chump Blocker, trade, and then Fatal Push. So if you can actually 2-for-1, like trade with 1 creature, Fatal Push the other off the Revolt trigger, that's a huge, huge value. So another purpose for this card here. Okay, let's go on to the sideboard. And one big thing to point out is a lot of people are aware of Torrential Gearhulk list, and there's a lot of black decks that are playing, Dispossess, I think is the name of the card, which basically lets you remove an artifact from your opponent's deck and exile all of them. Game 2, if we're playing against any black deck, they usually have that in the sideboard, and they're bringing it in against Torrential Gearhulk. So we're going to sideboard taking the Gearhulks out. And what I've chosen to replace them, although sometimes we'll leave them like 1 or 2, is a Sphinx of the Final Word. Also good against Control Mirrors, but for what I'm talking about, we can add this in, and we have 2 Sorin. So this is alternate win conditions for us at the similar like mana cost that our opponents aren't going to expect. If they're expecting a Torrential Gearhulk matchup, they're going to try to remove those. They're going to pack in a lot of ways to get rid of it, and all of those cards are suddenly going to be completely dead against Sorin. It's going to be completely dead against Sphinx of the Final Word, so that's why they're here. It's a transformational sideboard. I already mentioned the 1 more Anguish Unmaking, and the purpose of that card, and the 1 more Deck and Stone. Now let's also just talk about the obvious inclusions for the sideboard. 3 Fragmentize, takes out Aetherworks Marvel, takes out Heartakura, and any type of artifact build, which is starting to be limited now. There is, the Paradox Engine, like kind of Storm deck I'm seeing pop up a lot. It has like the Hedron Archives and a lot of the Mandaroks and stuff. This can be good for that. And then we have 3 Transgress the Mind, which we're going to use against Control Mirrors or any type of combo, which is the kind of limited in this current meta. But, it's a good card. It's worth having when you have dead removal, or if you're playing against something like a green energy deck where the Fatal Push are going to be like kind of off curve. They're going to be playing things a little above it, a lot of 3 drops, a lot of 4 drops. You can swap the Fatal Push in for the Transgress and try to be a little more proactive in the removal. Lastly, we have 2 Dispel, which is going to be thrown if we're playing against blue-red, which is one of the few problem decks for us. This is going to be important to throw in. They usually pack more removal and more counter magic than we do, and they're able to churn through their deck similar speed, but they just have so much more access to counter magic. So we're going to throw those in. And then lastly, 2 Thalia. Thalia is good against aggro. It's good against all the zombies builds. The first strike, it can usually take something out, and then also just slow down their clock is pretty good. Sometimes if it's something like a zombies build, they're going to be recasting stuff out of the graveyard, and then the spell queller's irrelevant because we're not able to actually get rid of that, especially if something plays Scrap Heap Scrounger, which they probably are going to pull in against us or any control matchup post board. In that kind of matchup, you're going to want to drop down a couple Quellers, and then on the same mana cost, throw in 2 Thalia, and that's going to be a better route for you overall. So here's the deck. A lot of tweaking, a lot of experimentation. This is a build that I actually used in the previous standard, and I've only changed it for the new meta and the new cards. The only new inclusions from Amonkhet is Censor and Cast Out. Both fantastic, but I think that's kind of the only thing that really needs to be added to this. I've experimented with the cycle lands, and they're okay. I do like them, but for what we're doing here, the mana base, it works very well, and it is 3 colors, and it's a bit awkward, and we have to hit our drops at certain timing and stuff. So I'm not really willing to chance it on any type of new tech for lands. So if you have any questions or comment below, please place them below, and I will get to them immediately. And I will also include the tapped out deck list below for you in the description. Don't forget to subscribe, and if there's any other decks you want to see, let me know. Take care.